The storm rolled over the Montana plains like an angry god, sweeping snow across the broken fences and frozen earth. In the heart of it, a small cabin stood crooked against the wind, its roof sagging, its windows black as regret. Inside, the cries of newborns mingled with the groans of a woman too weak to stand. Her name was Clara, and she had given birth not to one, not two, but 3 baby girls in a world that wanted sons. The man who should have been their father had left before dawn, his boots heavy with disappointment, his words like knives. "A man needs sons," he'd said, not curses. Then the door had slammed, and all that was left was the sound of the storm and the soft, trembling whimpers of life newly born. Hours passed, or maybe days. Clara couldn't tell. Her body was cold, her soul colder. She wrapped the babies in scraps of cloth and held them close, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. When the door burst open again, she didn't lift her head. She expected another blow, another curse, another man telling her what she'd failed to be. But instead came the sound of boots hesitating on the wooden floor. Then a voice, rough, deep, carrying something she hadn't heard in a long time. Concern. "Ma'am," it said. "You're hurt." She turned, her vision blurring through tears and fever, and saw him, a tall man wrapped in a brown coat, snow melting on his shoulders. A rancher, by the look of him. Alone, by the weight in his eyes. He stepped closer, careful as though she might vanish if he moved too fast. "Name's Eli Turner," he said. "Got a ranch a few miles east. I seen your husband ride off. Figured someone might be left behind." Clara tried to speak, but only managed a hoarse whisper. "He didn't want them," she said, glancing down at the infants. Eli crouched, his face softening. "3 of them," he murmured. "You did all this alone?" She nodded, too weak to hold back the tears. Eli stood, his jaw tight with something between anger and sorrow. "No one deserves to be left like this," he said. Then, with a gentleness that seemed strange for a man his size, he wrapped his coat around her shoulders and lifted one of the babies from the cold floor. Clara looked up, startled. "Where are you taking us?" she asked. He met her gaze, a quiet fire behind his eyes, and said the words that would change both their lives forever. "You're coming with me." Eli's voice carried through the freezing air like a promise made in stone. Clara blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. The world outside was all white and silence, and yet his words felt louder than the storm itself. "You're coming with me," he'd said, not as a command, but as a vow. Before she could protest, he scooped up the second baby, tucking her inside his coat. "We can't stay here," he said firmly. "They'll freeze." Clara wanted to argue, to tell him she couldn't go, but her body had no strength left to fight. She let him help her up, her legs trembling as he guided her through the snow. Every step felt like walking through a dream, the world spinning, her heart beating weakly beneath her ribs. Behind them, the cabin stood still and empty, the smoke from its chimney fading into nothing. The wind bit at their faces as Eli led her toward his horse. It was a strong, chestnut mare that snorted steam into the cold. He wrapped Clara in a wool blanket, lifted her gently onto the saddle, then handed her the third baby. "Hold on tight," he said. "We'll be home soon." Home. The word struck her like a memory she didn't believe in anymore. But when Eli mounted behind her and the horse began to move, she felt, for the first time in months, something like safety. The snow swirled around them as they rode through the endless white, the sound of hooves muffled by the drifts. Eli's arms were steady around her, strong but careful, his breath warm against the back of her neck. Hours later, when the outline of his ranch came into view, a lonely farmhouse surrounded by silent pines, Clara nearly wept. The place looked weathered but alive, with smoke curling gently from its chimney and the faint glow of lanterns in the windows. Eli helped her inside, the heat from the fire wrapping around her like a forgotten embrace. "You can rest here," he said, lowering the babies into a cradle that looked like it hadn't been used in years. She noticed his eyes linger on the small wooden toy horse beside it, dust-covered but cared for. "You have children?" she asked softly. He paused, his jaw tightening before he answered. "Had," he said simply. Clara said nothing, sensing pain she couldn't touch. Eli poured her a cup of warm broth, his hands rough but kind. "You don't owe me thanks," he said when she tried to speak. Just don't leave them out there alone. Not like I had to. His voice broke on the last word, and silence filled the room, heavy and fragile. Clara looked at him, the stranger who had carried her from death's edge, and something inside her began to thaw. She didn't know his story, and he didn't know hers. But for now, in this lonely ranch house buried under snow, two broken souls had found shelter in each other's quiet. The wind outside moaned through the cracks of the old ranch house, but inside, the fire's glow softened the hard edges of everything it touched. Clara sat near the hearth, her 3 baby girls, sleeping close together in the cradle that creaked softly as the flames danced. Eli moved quietly in the background, feeding the fire, hanging up his coat, brushing snow from his hat. He was a man used to silence. Every motion of his hands spoke of years spent alone, mending fences and carrying memories he never spoke aloud. Clara watched him for a long while before breaking the hush. "Why'd you come for me?" she asked finally, her voice barely more than a whisper. Eli didn't answer right away. He poured himself a cup of coffee, stared into the black liquid, and then said, "Because no one came for mine." The words hung heavy in the air. Clara tilted her head, confused but afraid to ask. Eli looked up, meeting her gaze. "My wife Mary, she died bringing our boy into the world," he said quietly. "Snowstorm just like this one. I was out mending fences, thinking I had time. By the time I got back," his voice faltered, rough and uneven, "I buried them both behind the barn. Been living with the ghosts ever since." Clara felt her throat tighten. She wanted to say she was sorry, but the words felt small next to the size of his pain. Eli gave a slow, tired smile, the kind that hides more than it shows. "When I saw your husband ride off, I knew that look," he continued. "A man leaving his heart behind, because he don't know how to carry it anymore." He looked toward the cradle, where the babies slept like tiny flickers of light in the dark. "Didn't seem right, letting someone else suffer what I already knew too well." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire popped, the wind howled, and the night pressed closer. Clara stared into the flames, her mind swirling with fear, exhaustion, and gratitude she didn't yet know how to hold. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said finally. Eli nodded. "Then you stay," he replied simply, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "This place ain't much, but it's dry, it's warm, and it's honest." Something in his tone made her believe him. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a burden, just a soul allowed to breathe. The babies stirred, one letting out a soft cry. Eli moved to soothe her instinctively, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he rocked the cradle. Clara watched him, realizing that maybe loneliness had its own way of recognizing itself, and maybe, just maybe, it could heal. Morning broke slow and silver over the mountains, the kind of quiet light that made the snow look endless. Clara woke to the faint crackle of firewood and the smell of coffee drifting through the cabin. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memories came: storm, pain, the stranger who saved her. She turned her head and saw Eli outside the window, splitting wood, his breath rising in white clouds. The babies slept bundled near the stove, their tiny chests lifting in rhythm. A peace she had never known settled around her, fragile but real. When Eli came back inside, his cheeks were red from the cold. "Mornin'," he said with a shy nod. "Got oats on the stove if you're hungry." Clara tried to stand, but her legs trembled. Without a word, Eli set down the bucket he carried and offered his arm. She hesitated, then took it. The warmth of his skin surprised her. He led her to the table, poured her a bowl, then busied himself with chores like a man afraid to look too long at something delicate. As she ate, Clara studied him, the quiet patience in his movements, the way his eyes softened when they glanced toward the babies. This ranch was his whole world, yet it felt as if it had been waiting for someone to fill the silence. "You don't have to keep us," she said after a while. "We'll leave when I'm strong enough." Eli looked at her, the corners of his mouth tightening. "Ain't nobody keeping nobody," he said. "You stay 'cause you're safe here. That's all." Then, softer, "The world's got enough ghosts. Don't go mackin' more." Outside, the wind had eased, but the horizon held a shadow, tracks in the snow that didn't belong to Eli's horse. He noticed them first, his face turning grim. "Someone's been near the fence line," he muttered. Clara's heart clenched. She knew who it might be. Her husband had left angry, humiliated, and men like him didn't let shame rest easy. If he comes back, she began. Eli's gaze lifted to hers, steady and fierce. Then he'll learn what it means to stand between a man and what's right, he said. The babies stirred, their soft cries breaking the tension. Eli walked over, rocking the cradle with one hand, his eyes never leaving the door. Clara watched him, a mix of fear and gratitude twisting inside her. She realized she had stepped into a new kind of storm, one that wasn't made of wind and snow but of choices, old wounds, and the fragile thread of hope binding to broken lives. By dusk, the sky had turned the color of ash, and the air carried a stillness that warned of something coming. Eli had repaired the barn door and brought in extra firewood, but his eyes kept shifting toward the ridge above the valley. Clara felt the same unease twist in her chest. Every creak of the wind outside sounded like a memory she didn't want back. She held one of her daughters close, rocking her gently as shadows stretched long across the cabin walls. When the dogs started barking, Eli was already at the door, rifle in hand. "Stay inside," he said quietly. Clara's heart pounded as she peered through the frost-streaked window. A dark figure moved through the snow, slow, deliberate, too familiar to mistake. Her husband, his coat torn, his face half hidden by a scarf. But his eyes burned the same bitter fire she remembered. "You can't be here," she whispered, trembling. Eli stepped outside, his boots sinking into the drifts. "What do you want?" Eli called, his voice calm but iron-hard. The man spat into the snow. "My wife, my property." Clara flinched at the word. Eli's jaw clenched. "Ain't no property in that house," he said. "Just a woman and 3 children trying to live." The man laughed, a sound like rust breaking loose. "You think you can keep her from me?" He reached for his pistol, but Eli raised the rifle first, not shaking, not bluffing. "I don't think," he said. "I know." For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then the man's hand dropped, and he turned away, muttering curses swallowed by the snow. Eli stayed still until the figure vanished over the ridge. When he finally came back inside, the firelight caught the strain in his face. "He won't give up easy," Clara said, her voice shaking. Eli nodded. "Then neither will we." He set the rifle by the door, then looked at her, not as a savior, not as a stranger, but as someone choosing to stand beside her. "You and those little girls are safe here. That's my word." Clara felt tears she hadn't meant to cry slip down her cheeks. The babies slept, their soft breaths the only sound between them. She looked into the fire, the flames reflecting in her tired eyes, and realized something had changed. The loneliness that had ruled both their lives had found an answer not in words, but in the simple act of staying. Outside, the storm began again, gentler this time, as if the land itself wanted to cover the past in white. Inside, warmth held fast. Clara whispered to the sleeping children, "We're home now." And somewhere in the crackle of the fire, the wind carried Eli's quiet reply, "You're not alone anymore."